Fans of Pokemon might be familiar with Gold and Silver's Spaceworld demo, but if you're not, essentially what it was is a prototype build of Gen 2 that was only available to play at an exclusive event in Japan. For a super long time, nobody really knew much about this demo. You had to be there to play it in Japan, or you had to be a Nintendo insider. Otherwise, there was no real way to know what the contents of the build actually were. That was at least until 2018 when the ROM got uploaded to the internet. From there, fans were able to go and dig into it and see a treasure trove of what kind of early Gen 2 ideas were present in the beta build. Now, sifting through this demo is absolutely fascinating. There's a ton of unused content such as Pokemon that got put on the chopping block. The overworld is pretty different, a lot of the story is tweaked around, and there's just in general a lot of concepts that didn't quite make it to the final cut. But what I find the most fascinating are the Johto Pokemon that did make it in, but look quite different in their beta versions compared to the official version that we got. So with that said, I thought it'd be fun to look at the original beta designs and compare them against the official artwork to see if maybe Game Freak should have held on to any of them. Now, sprite quality in the beta is not super polished all around, so I'd say I'm going to be judging less on the sprite quality and more on the personality and creativity within each design. And as we go through and compare these, we'll keep a running tally to see if generally Game Freak made the right call, or maybe they had some missed opportunities. Alright, so starting off we got Bayleaf, and if you've ever played the Spaceworld demo, you might know that the fire and water starters were completely different Pokemon. These eventually got scrapped for Cyndaquil and Totodile, which we all love, but the Chikorita line is actually the one that managed to survive, with the exception of Bayleaf. So the original design had a little plant-like creature that's inside this bud, while the final version is drawn closer to the plant dinosaur theme that the rest of the line has. The idea is cool, and I think it was probably done better by other Pokemon later down the line, but here I just don't feel like it fits very well into the Chikorita lineage. The design itself is also pretty choppy, and it doesn't help that Bayleaf is probably the most memorable of the three. So I think changing the design here was absolutely a good call. I'm going to give the point to the official release. Next up we got Noctowl, and I think this one's interesting because unlike the final design that leans into pretty sharp detail and honestly resembles a real owl, the beta sprite looks a lot more cartoony. This might be a hot take, but I actually kind of like it. I like how the more round shape contrasts with the flaring face feathers, and the beta design fits well with Hoot as well. I guess the only thing about this design is maybe it looks a little too similar to Pidgey, but personally it doesn't bother me. So I'm actually going to give this point to the beta design. Here's one of my favorites, Meryl. Despite being the subject of the mysterious Peekaboo urban legend, the original beta design actually had Meryl colored pink. There are some subtle changes made to the design, most notably the tail shape. The official one has kind of a zigzag pattern going, while the beta one is curved and smooth. But I'd say the main difference mostly comes down to the color. Personally, I think if you're going to make a water Pokemon, blue is the right call. So we're going to go ahead and give this one to the official release as well. Ariados is one of those Pokemon that I wish was just a bit better in the game because I think their design is actually super cool, but their stats are absolutely terrible. That being said, the original design here feels a lot less inspired. It's just a spider. So I definitely think revisiting this one before the release was absolutely the right choice. I have very similar thoughts on Ladian here. I honestly had to do a double take to see if this was Lady Buh as opposed to Ladian, since this design feels more like a pre-evolution than a post-evolution. But this is correct, and I'm happy that they completely reworked it because the design here, there's nothing really interesting about it. It's just a generic ladybug. Alright, so here's an example of where I think a really cool concept just kind of got lost throughout the development. So the original idea for Remoraid is to have a fish that's shaped like a gun, and it becomes very clear if you look at the back sprite, it's shaped like a revolver. I think this is a fun idea, but for whatever reason, they decided to drop this concept and just go for a regular fish instead. I don't know, maybe this is a game for kids and they thought it was too much, but honestly I think the end result is a much less memorable Pokemon. Forgive me for the pun, but honestly, I wish they stuck to their guns here. We can see the same story play out here with Octillery, which, by the way, is a much more fitting name when we see the tank-like original design. On its own, I think Octillery is just kind of underwhelming, but in the beta form, Octillery is probably one of my favorite designs across Gen 2, so it's a huge shame we didn't get to see these come into fruition in the final cut. Hoppip somehow manages to have a design that is very similar and yet has an entirely different personality. I'd say the darker colors in the beta design give it much more of a ghoulish personality. I feel like I'm looking at a little shrub goblin. The official is a lot more cutesy and docile with the pink body and the flappy arms and legs. I feel like the beta version here would fit better in a Zelda dungeon than it would a Pokemon game, and I do think the addition of the arms is pretty big because it makes the sprite look like it's leaping in the air, which is very much on brand. So we're going to give it to the official version here. With Skiploom, we see pretty minimal changes for both versions. It feels like a pretty natural progression for the beta and the official. I'll go with the original, pretty much mostly for the same reasons I did with Hoppip, although I will say the longer tail here doesn't really look that good in my opinion. Now, the third part of the lineage is where, in theory, the theme should kind of come together, and I'd say this is where the designs diverge quite a bit. The official design follows the progression of Hoppip and Skiploom being little dandelions, so it ties it neatly together with Jumpluff resembling a cotton spore, and it can float freely in the wind. And I think the weakness of the beta designs really start to show here because it doesn't really come together. The body looks basically the same as its predecessors, but I cannot for the life of me figure out what the thing on its back is. It looks like a brain. I'm gonna go with the official design for this one. I remember laughing when I first saw Beta Pichu. It's super simple, it's just kind of a face with arms, but honestly, I think it's super cute, and the circular shape matches perfectly with the original chubby Pikachu design that I absolutely adore. The only real issue here is that the final Pichu design they ended up going with is just iconic. This might be my Smash Bros bias showing, but I just think this is one of those cases where the polish really shows and the final design wins it out. As we go through these, you'll see that a good chunk of the redesigned Pokemon were baby Pokemon, many of which are very similar to their official counterparts with just a few changes. Cleva's a pretty good example here. The only real difference is the antenna on its head in the beta versus keeping the curl in the official. I think the antenna is kind of fun. It fits with the moon Pokemon theme that they were going for with Clefable and Clefairy, but I'd say it makes more sense to just keep the curl, so I'm going to hand this one to the official. The original design for Igglybuff is just a straight up ball, and there's not even a little fluff on top. It's just super round. Honestly, it looks incredibly derpy, and I kind of love it, so I'm going to actually give this one to the beta. Phanpy's another one where the design isn't drastically different. The beta version has some markings instead of the red scales that we see in the official one, but I'd say the major difference is more with the eyes and the pose. I do really like the official one that they went with, but the way that the little beta design just kind of sits there with their arms folded, it's super adorable, so I'm going to give this one to the beta. Pretty night and day difference for Sneasel. The beta design basically looks nothing like the original. They changed the concept entirely to fit the dark and ice type Pokemon, but I think even setting that aside, the original design to me is just a worse looking version of Furret. So I think for that alone, it's a pretty easy point for the official release. Here's another design that I think the concept got completely lost in the development of the game. So Girafarig is a palindrome, which basically means that it reads the same way in reverse. If you don't believe me, you can try it yourself. And what they attempted to do with this Pokemon is bring that concept to life by making it two connected giraffes with the yellow side and the dark side kind of reversing. I guess somewhere along the way they just lost confidence in this idea and decided to slap a chain chomp to the back of the giraffe instead. Perhaps the two-sided giraffe might have been a bit awkward to animate or something, but to me this is one of those designs I remember looking at and being quite surprised how they took a very interesting idea and just kind of bailed. Honestly, I think it was a mistake. I think the palindrome idea was really cool, and I'm kind of sad that it wasn't realized. Apom is a monkey, and he's got a hand for a tail. I think the design holds true in both instances, but honestly, I've never really been a big fan of the official one. I think his wide beady eyes are just kind of creepy. I also like how the beta version has 5 hands. It kind of fits the concept better in my opinion versus giving the nubs to the official one, so we'll go with the beta version here as well. I've always felt like the official Tyrogue design doesn't really match the aesthetic of the evolutions. Like, honestly, I think it looks just as similar to Machop than it would to Hitmonchan or Hitmonlee. The beta version does have promise. I like the hat that they gave him. It reminds me of safety gear that you would wear when you're training, but my main issue is that the rest of the design is just a bit too basic. I think they were onto something that matches the aesthetic for a proper baby version of the fighting Pokemon, but I don't think there's quite enough there to justify putting it over the official. So the official Hitmontop is pretty straightforward. He spins on his head and kicks with his spiky feet. It's a fine design, but honestly my least favorite between Hitmonlee, Hitmontop, and Hitmonchan. The beta version, on the other hand, it's quite complex. There's a lot of stuff going on here. At first glance, you might think that the head is at the bottom like in the official design, but once you look a little bit more closely, you'll see that the head is actually in the middle and it's got its arms kind of palmed together like a Medicham. I think what they were going for here is that the Hitmontop is balancing on the bottom portion of its body and then it's attacking, of course, with its spiky head. Honestly, once you decipher what they're going for, I think it's a really cool design, and I would say I prefer it over the original, so point to the beta version. Murkrow might look like it's basically the same, but in my opinion, there's actually some features in the beta version that I feel like give it more personality. First, the demeanor that is showcased in the sprite really screams dark type. The hat is also in the shape of a witch's hat as opposed to the kind of spiky top hat that they ended up giving him. Honestly, those subtle differences really do come together because I feel like the official version that they went with is just less memorable. Smoochum's original design was mostly just a small version of regular Jinx, and with that comes the famous blackface controversy that landed Pokemon in a bit of hot water. With the redesign, they chose to give Smoochum quite a different look, but of course the main difference is going to be changing that skin tone from black to purple. Now, do I think Game Freak was trying to be racist? No, definitely not, but this is still a pretty good change, and I'm going to give it to the redesign just for racial sensitivity alone. Beta Ellicate is just a little egg. It's cute, but I think the spunk that they gave the official design is just a lot more interesting, especially with the plug on its head. To me, it's a lot more fitting for an electric Pokemon than the halo that they gave the little egg in the beta. Finishing off the last of the baby Pokemon, we got Magby. The original design had this spiky volcano head, but then they chose to replace it with the curls in the finished version. I guess this is to better match the butt cheeks forehead that Magmar has, but honestly this is one of the few baby designs that I actually prefer the beta version. I think the spikes just add a bit more flair, which he's a fire type Pokemon, so it makes sense. Delibird's original design was much more on the nose. They really made the resemblance to Santa much more clear. They even gave him a beard and a little Santa hat. Is it silly? Yes. Do I like it? Yes, I do. After the PR disaster that was the Jinx controversy, it doesn't surprise me that they chose to give the hula dancing Pokemon a change in skin tone. But the most offensive part to me is Blossom as an evolution to Gloom. It just never really made sense to me. I guess the original design is a little bit closer. But if I'm being honest with myself, I do like the vibrant colors that they went with for the official design. Just makes sense for a hula dancing Pokemon, so I'm going to give it to the official. Pretty big changes for Politoed here. The beta version was this big old bulky frog, while the final one went with a slimmer and more cartoony look. I always thought the pivot from Poliwhirl to Politoed was a bit out there, although in isolation, I think it's a great design. The beta provides a good groundwork for something that would be more fitting, but honestly, I think it's just kind of a hair too basic. Considering you do need a King's Rock to evolve Poliwhirl to Politoed, honestly, missed opportunity, why not give him a crown? I feel like that would have been a little something that may have won me over. Beta Blissey feels like it could be a pre-evolution of Chansey. Don't get me wrong, I do like the big old heart that they slapped on its head, but I think she's just too short, which throws me off. The official version is just much better in my opinion. They made her bigger, which fixed the size issue, and just gave her a lot of features that really accentuate that motherly vibe. Now this is a pretty interesting change. The original version of Scizor was colored to resemble Scyther, while the final version was changed to that iconic red and black design. Now if the goal was to take Scyther and make him into a steel type, then I think taking the organic green and converting it into that sharp material color was absolutely the right call. So I'm going to give this point to the official, and people love Scizor, so I don't think this is going to be a hot take. I think if any Pokemon demonstrates the value of polish, it's going to be Porygon 2 on this list. So the idea behind the original Porygon is that it's a computer application. Because 3D graphics were very limited at the time, it was mostly made up of polygons, and as technology improved, the idea to make a version 2 and smooth out the polygons is a fantastic and fun concept for a Pokemon. But the beta version of Porygon 2 is just so far off from the original that it just doesn't work. It's this strange hybrid between a dog and a lion that's made up completely of circles. I'm not really sure what they were going for. The official version saw this concept realized beautifully by creating a smoothed out version from the original Porygon that looks sleek, looks smooth, polished, the colors pop. Honestly, this is one of my favorite Pokemon, so no contest, the official revision here is way better. Kingdra was probably one of the toughest choices for me because I actually love both of these designs. If I had to summarize it, I'd say the official design leans more into the seahorse aesthetic, while the beta version leaned more into the dragon aesthetic. I'm going to go with the beta version just because I feel like Seadra already nails the seahorse angle, so if the point was to elevate a water type into a water dragon hybrid, then I think the beta version accomplishes that just a bit better. Alright, where do I begin? This will be a common theme among all the legendary dogs, but as legendary Pokemon, we should expect it to capture a sense of elusiveness or majesticness. The beta version just falls completely flat here for Raikou because 1, it's kind of a generic looking dog, and 2, it has this bizarre Super Saiyan haircut that just looks really goofy. We'd see a much better version of what they were going for later down the line with Manectric, and I do think the Raikou design that they ended up going with is much better, although the bar for improvement was set pretty low here. Entei's beta design is just outclassed by multiple other Pokemon on its own. I think it's too similar to Ninetales, but it's also getting beat out by Houndoom as the Gen 2 Fire Dog. The official one for Entei also looks super good. It's proud, it's legendary, so no contest here. We're going with the official. And finally, we're ending off with Suicune, a Pokemon with a design so iconic that he was featured as the mascot of Pokemon Crystal. It's quite funny to see how the beta version shows quite the humble beginnings. I think the emo haircut alone is enough to warrant a redesign. It looks like the dragon from the Neverending Story. I don't think this Pokemon belongs on any cover, maybe one of the bootleg cartridges, but other than that, I'm glad they took the time to redesign Suicune because the official design looks absolutely amazing. Alright, so wrapping it up here, we have a total count of 21 wins for the official designs and then 12 wins for the beta versions. In general, I'd say the revisions were for the better. I think they added a nice level of polish, but I will say there were some concepts that I do think had a lot of potential had they been realized. We'd love to hear what you think about some of these designs in the comments below, and other than that, thank you so much for watching.